Thank you very much. As Penny mentioned, I was here in September and I had a really good time. And it was a really nice conversation. So when they invited me back, I was really excited to come. So I'm happy to be here. I'm happy that you all are here as well. Um, I am going to. Yeah, so this is just an outline of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk for about 25 or 30 minutes, hopefully. And it's organized in the following ways. I'm going to talk about Orwell himself, although you don't know much about him. I learned a bit about him preparing for this. And then I want to talk about three Bs that I think are relevant for our current political situation. As you can see them up there, one is the perpetual war, secondly, surveillance, and thirdly, assault on the truth. So let's start. George Orwell was born Eric Blair. Orwell is his pen name. He was born in 1903 and was now India. He later described being born into a lower upper middle class family. Meaning that his family was sort of downwardly mobile. His grandfather on his mother's side was actually quite wealthy and had high class status. But by the time he was born, things were kind of going downhill a little bit. His father was an opium agent for the British Crown in India at the time, kind of low-level bureaucrat. Orwell was the second of three children, and by age one, he and his family had moved back to England, where he was raised. He didn't always perform great in school, but he was very bright and sometimes performed quite well in school. In fact, he earned a scholarship to Eton at a young age, but there was no place for him in Eton. So he was unable to attend there until his very last year at secondary school, at which point he did attend Eton for 1 year. After he graduated, his parents informed them that they didn't have money to send him to university and encouraged him to join the civil service. He did. He joined the Imperial Police at age 19 and found himself stationed in Burma at that age. He spent about 5 years there. Um, and in the fifth year, in 1927, he contracted dengue fever and was forced to take a leave and come back to England. He didn't, he had, a up close view of the British Empire, and he didn't like it. He was not a major of the British Empire. At the same time, he was in some ways, he had kind of imperial mind. He viewed the Burmese as quote unquote savages. So upon returning home, he decided to leave the service and wanted to become a writer. And he did just that. In fact, he wrote about his time in Burma. His first novel was published in 1934 called Burmese Days. He also wrote essays at that time as well about Burma. He was influenced by a number of authors who wanted to chronicle the lives of the sort of ordinary have-not people in England. So he moved to London, he moved to the East End, he lived in boarding houses, he lived in squats. He sort of observed the life of the working class and even kind of, unemployed long term and the like. He later did the same thing in Paris, later to write a book called Out and Out in London and Paris. In the meantime, he paid his bills by writing. He's a journalist, he was an essayist, he became a teacher briefly. But it was writing that he wanted to do, continue to write. He was also not a healthy person. He had pneumonia 4 separate times between the ages of 15 and 35. And suffered from his lungs suffered failure his entire life, really, and was made much better by the time he was having smoke. Um, okay. The other thing I want to talk about in terms of his biography is his experience in the Spanish Civil War. He was a devoted democratic socialist, and when the war against fascism broke out, there were lots of anti-fascists, and especially people on the left from all over the world, came to volunteer in Spain on the Republican side. And he did that as well. He was rejected by the International Brigade, mainly because it was controlled by the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. And at the time, Stalin, of course, was the leader, and he was viewed as being suspect. for his democratic socialist leanings. So he joined a lesser group, or a smaller group, I should say. They were called the Workers' Party of Marxist Unification. It was a Trotskyist party, but it was kind of as close as he could find. He also had some contacts in that party. So he went in late 1936 to northern Spain to fight on the Republican cause. 6 months into that fight, he was gravely wounded by a sniper's bullet. And he went to recuperate first in Spain, but street battles broke out among the communists and socialists. And the International Brigade captured many of the leaders of his group and tried them in kangaroo courts, tortured them, and executed a number of them. So he, at this point, feared for his life, and he fled to France and later came back to England. But he was very much influenced by his experience there, especially, interestingly enough, less with the fascists and more with his fellow fighters, many of whom were communists. So he later wrote, uh, quote, every line of serious work that I've written since 1936 has been written, directly or indirectly, against totalitarianism and for democratic socialism. That comes from his 1946 essay, Why I Write. So he returned to England, was in ill health. He spent some time in Morocco to recover as well. He anticipated World War II, and in the meantime, he did a lot of writing. So he wrote a book Coming Up for Air in 1939, which was a little bit autobiographical. Talked a lot about rural England, where he spent a lot of his growing up years. He also wrote the book that most of us know, Animal Farm, during the middle of World War II. During World War II, he worked for the Home Guard, and he was also in the censorship office for the British government, a job not all that different from the job that Winston Smith had in the period before, of course. He finished Animal Farm in 1943, but he couldn't find a publisher for it. And the reason why is because British and American publishing houses were afraid to publish it because it was obviously a critique of a key ally in World War II. So it was only in 1945 that the book was published in the UK, or in England, and a year later in the United States. There were only 4,500 initial printings, and they quickly sold out, and very quickly 50,000 sold, and then more and more and more. It's a very popular book, and enjoys a critical acclaim as well. So let's talk about 1984. It was his last work. He completed it in 1949. It was published in 1949. Much was written in 47, 48. He finished it on the Scottish island of Jura, and it became his most well-known book. And of course, he died shortly after it was published in the latter months of 1949, dying in January 1950. The book, of course, was part science fiction, part political allegory, political commentary, and an allegory describing a totalitarian future. Interestingly, while it was really a critique of the Soviet Union, it was placed in the future and in England. So let's talk about some themes. As we said, three main themes. Of course, as I'm sure you all reread it before coming tonight. So you will recall that during the story, that Oceania, the super state that Winston is a citizen, is at war. It's at war with Eurasia. Of course, Oceania and Eurasia were once allied, fighting against the third of three super states, East Asia, during the time. So what this really means is that there is constantly war taking place. And one of the consequences is that there is constant preparation for war. This is easier. And constant sacrifice for war. One idea is that the war is not meant to be won, but rather to be maintained, and it's a continuity. This is a point that Winston reads in the middle of the book. He's reading Emmanuel Goldstein, the kind of foil to Big Brother and the enemies, really Trotsky, writes his manifesto. And in one of the chapters of the manifesto, Goldstein writes about the nature of this particular war. And he writes, quote, "In one combination or another, these three superstates are permanently at war. It does not matter whether the war is actually happening, and since no decisive victory is possible, it does not matter whether the war is going well or going badly. All that is needed is that a state of war should exist." So, don't know if you know it, but currently the United States is maybe at war with Iran. Depends on what day of the week it is and who you're talking to, and if they're talking about the war powers act. But otherwise, as you can see, the little brief timeline here, the U.S. started bombing Iran the last day of February. There's been a ceasefire since early April, sort of ceasefire. There have been on-again, off-again negotiations. And of course, this is the second attack under the second administration against Iran, the first having taken place last summer over about a 2-week period targeting Iran's nuclear weapons development. But I don't really want to talk about that. I want to talk about, wait for it, these guys. I want you to take a step back. I want you to close your eyes, but you don't have to close your eyes. But I want you to imagine a country. Let's call this country Country X. This is how many countries Country X has bombed in the first quarter of the 21st century under 4 different presidents, Republican and Democrat. What may we conclude about Country X? There's a parallel. To try to think about this, I want to talk to you about this book written by a historian who just recently retired at Boston University named Andrew Bacevich. Bacevich, in addition to being a historian, he was a career military officer. He retired as a lieutenant colonel before going into higher education. And he wrote this book, it's about 20 years old now, titled The New American Militarism, How Americans Are Seduced by War. And he's trying to explain how he got to the situation that he sees us in. And he kind of starts his analysis with the end of the Vietnam War in the early to mid 1970s, where the military didn't enjoy the kind of respect that it enjoys today. And there were real questions about the use of the military force, both inside and outside of government. So his answer to this is, it's a little complicated, but let me try to summarize it for you quickly. He said there were a number of changes that took place. The first really important one was internal. The military remade itself. It became a volunteer army, and military more generally. It relied on professionalism. A lot of its higher officers got advanced degrees, and it relied on technology. It really emphasized technology. And it also involved itself in some public relations, to be sure, which we'll talk a little bit about as well. But in addition to these internal changes, he says there are changes external to the military itself, but inside the United States. And he points to 3 really important ones. The first one is ideological change. Part of that is about when you use the military and how the military gets in with U.S. foreign policy. And much of that chapter has to do with what are frequently called the neocons of the Balkans. These are thinkers inside and outside of government who kind of came to fore toward the end of the Clinton administration and really dominated the George W. Bush administration as well. So he talks about how they see the world and how they view the use of military force. The second one is popular culture. Everything from Tom Clancy novels to Hollywood movies that glorify the U.S. military. And by the way, many of those movies are in part funded by the Pentagon. In addition to the money for funding them, they also let the filmmakers use their tools. They're highly sophisticated weapons. Movies like Top Gun, those kinds of things. And more. And then finally is the politicization of evangelical Christians, many of whom share the idea of a God-informed, robust, America-first foreign policy. The result, according to Kafasevich, is that we see the use of military force as the first tool to solve foreign policy problems. Whether, and as a citizenry, as we watch this happen, we are either, or maybe both at the same time, enamored by the technological prowess that our military has, or we're bored because we've seen it so many times before. So let me ask you this with a show of hands. How many of you remember that the United States bombed Nigeria on Christmas Day last year? Mainly not even in the news. A new country on Christmas Day. Kind of speaks to the point. James Madison wrote about this. Yeah, I should be able to. Madison wrote a series of essays called Political Observations in 1795, and he warned that war would lead to excessive executive power, the loss of freedom among the citizenry, and the corrupting of public morals. He saw constant war as being incompatible with democracy. I think it's also important to talk, when we talk about perpetual war, about the war at home, much like in the book 1984. This is the testimony of Secretary of War, renamed Pete Hegseth, about 2 weeks ago before Congress, where he said that he wasn't really concerned about the enemy abroad in Iran, that those military forces could be handled, that the biggest worry was that back here at home, among the kind of spineless Democrats and some Republicans, the rhinos, who were not kind of backing and trusting that everything was going well in the war with Iran. Now, again, this is not new. We certainly saw this during the Cold War. We saw it during McCarthyism. We saw it during the Red Scare, the early 1920s as well. But I would suggest that this is increasingly dangerous. The rise in the rhetoric of the political opposition at home as heated. I want to illustrate that briefly. You would know this. This is called National Security Presidential Memorandum Number 7, also titled the Countering Domestic Terrorism and Organized Political Violence Memorandum, that President Trump signed shortly after the assassination of Charlie Kirk. The ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, describes this document as, quote, chilling to read, with no definition of terrorism, of extremism, or violence. In the signing ceremony, President Trump described how the memo would allow him to target Antifa. On one hand, it fails to create any new presidential powers or crimes or create any crimes, but on the other, it discusses as the main threat ideology, not action, not violence, ideology. The ACLU warns that this will have a chilling effect on free speech rights. Theme 2, surveillance. If you're like me, one of the biggest takeaways I left 1984 with was this image of the telescreen. Right? The telescreen is this two-way video communications device. On one hand, it constantly spews government propaganda. And on the other, it surveils. And importantly, it does so both in public spaces and in private spaces. So it listens and it observes its political subjects. It is omnipresent. This is reminiscent of the Panopticon. How many of you know the original Panopticon? This is from the political philosopher and statesman Jeremy Bentham, who was English and lived in the 1700s. He was also almost like something of an inventor. He was a public policy person who liked to solve political problems. And at one point, he's charged with the government of how can we build a better prison. And he went and traveled a little bit, and he visited with his brother, and his brother was interested in surveilling of factory workers to make sure that they weren't slumping off on the job. And he kind of was influenced by that a little bit, and he answered this question about how you could build the ideal prison. Remember, he's a utilitarian, right? So he wants to be very efficient. And so his answer to this question is to build a prison in the round, where on the outskirts, all the prison cells sit with all the prisoners within them. And in the center, as you can see here, is the guard tower. And the guards in the guard tower are largely, you can't see them, but they have viewing areas where they can look out. So the idea of the panopticon is the all-seeing eye. And what's efficient about it is that if prisoners don't know when they might be being watched, they must always assume they're being watched. And they therefore govern themselves. They obey. That's what surveillance is meant to do, is to get people to obey. So you know you're being surveilled. That's really, in some ways, the best of all worlds for those who want social control. Oh, these are my three things that I want to talk about. Three modern forms of surveillance: our phones, cameras, and then just the data that we generate on a day-to-day basis. So I want to talk about these. How many of you got your phones with you? How many of you still have them on? Okay, good. I think. Here's the thing about phones. They are all of these things. They are trackers. They track our location. They could know you're here right now very easily. They track our communications. They track our keystrokes, our little texting, pressing the little magic buttons, and they track the apps that we use, and they track through the apps that we use, and the websites that we visit as well. And in addition, we haven't really talked about spyware, things that can go onto your phone, you put onto your phone, things like Pegasus and the like. What a lot of people don't know is that you don't need to accidentally download malware to have spyware put onto your phone. Spyware can be put onto your phone remotely, or it really doesn't even go onto your phone. It just spies on you through the towers that your phone pings against. Again, not just knowing where you are, where you're pinging, but now it could get into your text messages, your WhatsApp discussions, on and on and on. So those are our phones. Cameras. I Googled this over and over again because the number doesn't make sense to me. But I keep getting the same number. 85 million cameras in the United States right now. Take a step back. They're not all government cameras. Many of them are private cameras. Many of them are your cameras on your homes. Who has a Ring doorbell? Who has, cameras, security cameras on their homes? And of course, loads of businesses and industry also have cameras to kind of observe, right? Atlanta is the most surveilled city in the United States, followed by Washington, Philadelphia, San Francisco, and Denver. Many of these cameras have facial recognition technology. Much of that facial recognition technology is not very good. It misidentifies people, especially if you're not Caucasian. But it's getting better all the time, so you can listen to LPRs are license plate readers, so they can be observed through our cars, and ALPRs are automated license plate readers. So license plate readers, as I'll show in a minute, really kind of came in widespread use after 9/11, and they were mainly operated by police forces. But now they just sit on traffic signals, so they just see customer intersections or bridges or whatever it might be as well. The U.S. is probably not the most surveilled democracy in America in the world. It's probably the U.K. And of course, China, not a democracy, has one camera for every 4.6 people. So many of the cameras that I'm talking about here are private, but that should not put you at rest, because a lot of those private cameras are also accessible by the authorities and are shared by the authorities as well. Finally, our data more generally. In today's age, 2026, we all generate loads of data every single day. You go to the grocery store and you see your receipt of what you bought at the end. Well, they're keeping all that data about what you bought, and it can be used for lots of different things. That's just one example. Voting, filling out surveys, writing Yelp and Google reviews. We wear health trackers on our bodies. We post on social media. We send texts. We do Google searches. We have smart home devices like Alexa and Google Home. We have Ring cameras. We have smart TVs and other devices. We have so much data. We generate so much data that those who want our data are actually swimming in it and have a little bit of trouble separating what they want from all the data there is about us. But again, rest assured, because there are companies that will do that for the government. Palantir, you may have heard of, is first and foremost, they describe themselves as a, quote, data integration and AI analytics company. What that means, they go through all that data and they make sense of it, but they also use AI to predict based on that data. And as we know, that one of the biggest customers, and they're not the only one, is the US government. This prediction, among other things, is the ability to predict who they see as dangerous, who they see as a dissident or an extremist, or who should be targeted. You guys recognize that image? Tom Cruise. It's an old movie, Minority Report, came out in 2002. The premise of the movie is that it's in the future, and the authorities can, through technology, determine who is going to murder somebody, and that they can intervene before the murder happens so that the murder doesn't take place. So it's also slightly dystopian, ultimately, movie, and not unlike 1984, it's set in the future, in 1254. So I think it's appropriate here. I like to say the origins of all of this are really, for me, twofold. One is just the ever moving forward in technology. Right, this year is the 20th anniversary of the invention and introduction of the iPhone. It seems like forever ago, but it's 20 years, and now we all carry these smartphones around with us all the time, right? So on one hand, there's AI, of course, which is very new as well. But I trace most of the rest of this to a lot of actions the government has taken since 9/11. Everything from the USA Patriot Act to Section 702, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. That act was not passed until, do you know what it is? No. It was passed in 2008 by Congress. And the idea was that the U.S. government, mainly through the National Security Agency, should be able to, without a warrant, collect all of the communications data that comes. So the idea is here, or how it's sold, is that we're surveilling foreigners. But if they're communications going into the United States, they're going to someone. And maybe they're also foreigners who happen to be here at the time, green card holders, but you can bet it's U.S. citizens. So at the time when they passed this, like many of the things that they passed, there were a lot of civil libertarians who weren't too sure this was a good idea in Congress, and so there were sunset provisions that were put into this. They said, it's an emergency time, we're fighting the war on terror, we don't want to violate people's civil liberties, but this is a special topic. We just need to do this. And then it's going to go away in a year, whatever. Section 702 of FISA has been reauthorized 4 times now, since 2008. So it's almost 20 years old. Most recently, last month, it was reauthorized again. There was a big fight about it. It was kind of behind the scenes, so it only got reauthorized for, I think, 45 days. So it's going to happen again very quickly. You're going to start hearing about it in June. But every time it's up for reauthorization, there's a little dog and pony show of all of the national security people within Democratic or Republican administrations who say, the sky's going to fall if we don't reauthorize this. And they usually convince enough people to pass it. In addition, there's the rise of data brokers. So the dirty little secret about surveillance is that the vast majority of the surveillance that is done to Americans is done by the private sector. It's done by the makers of apps. It's done by Facebook. It's done by Google. It's done by Stop and Shop. It's done by health providers and insurance companies and the like. However, much of this data, once it's collected about us, becomes very, very valuable. and it is collected and it is sold to the highest bidder by data brokers. The story of the 2020s is that increasingly one of the best customers, especially under the second Trump administration, one of the best customers is the U.S. government. It's the FBI. Increasingly, it is ICE and Customs and Border Patrol. That's it. Okay. Assault on treaties. I'm running a little off here. I'm going to try and go fast. So here the key concept, of course, is doublespeak in 1984, the government-sponsored language that deliberately obscures, distorts, and reverses the meaning of words and terms. Part of this, of course, is a larger project of denying the reality that people experience or see with their own eyes. Orwell himself derived this from the Soviet experience, where history was whitewashed and leaders, people, actually disappeared from photos that were taken. They were airbrushed out, right? Also, of course, there's newspeak, which simplifies language in an effort to make it more difficult to commit thought crimes. Examples are ungood for bad, plus good for very good. The idea here is to try to dumb down society in a way through the control of language. President Trump's first official lie was an inauguration day, 2017, where he insisted that his crowds were larger than President Obama's crowd speakers earlier. This has not gone away. Last month, he brought in the press to talk about how he was going to beautify the reflecting pool of the National Mall. And at that meeting, he insisted that he had as many people at his inauguration as Martin Luther King had for the I Have a Dream speech in 1962. That number was estimated to be 1 million people for the I Have a Dream speech. Trump said, quote, I actually had more people, but that's okay. Recall also that during his first term, the Washington Post took it upon themselves to keep a running total of all of his lies and misleading statements. By the end of this term, that total was 30,573, or an average of more than 21 false statements or misstatements each day. Skipping to the second term, some of the first, many will of the second term. As Kenny mentioned, assaults on history, the removal of plaques or the replacing of plaques with different kinds of language that's there, attacks on truth through attacking science, through attacking academia, and through attacking the press, all of which their main job is to fight the truth, right? He referred to fake polls and remove people who release bad news, whether military officers or members of the Department of Labor, for example. He also made grandiose claims. Think back to the perfect phone call he insists he had with Vladimir Zelensky, or the best economy in the history of the world. It comes out somewhat regularly. These are just some examples. His newspeak, Kellyanne Conway's alternative facts from the first term, referring to fake news, witch hunt. He's even got an entire social media company that he owns called Truth Social, where people who post on him post truths. That's what they're called. Of course, January 6th, he refers to as a day of love, very Orwellian. Ministry of Love, of course, where they torture people. And people who are convicted of crimes on January 6th, he referred to as the J6 hostages as well. And of course, all of the national emergencies that he's declared over all of the different things, including a national emergency that allows him to bypass the regular channels to repaint the reflecting pool. Sounds like an emergency. I don't want to make light of these attacks on truth. The philosopher Hannah Arendt wrote about this, and she was also an expert on totalitarianism more generally. She escaped the Holocaust and witnessed Nazi propaganda. The danger, she writes, is not that people believe the lies, but rather that they will stop believing in anything or anyone. Think about this. Today, doctors, science, experts, business leaders, judges, are all suspect. They are not trusted by wide swaths of American society. In fact, today, ordinary Americans trust not just don't trust just elites, but also in a recent survey rank among the lowest in trust in each other. When asked whether or not they trust their neighbors last year in a Pew poll, 44% of Americans said they could trust their neighbors, down about 10 points from 10 years earlier. While 26% said they have, quote, little or no trust in their neighbors. The implications for democracy under such a situation, I would suggest, are rather dire. So, let me close. Slide. 1984, of course, was first and foremost a commentary on totalitarianism. When I was in graduate school, I took a class of totalitarianism, and I learned that the term is actually controversial in academia because it's within this larger umbrella of authoritarianism. And authoritarianism is frequently thought and understood to be a situation where people take control of government, often armed, where they attempt to depoliticize the population. They tell people to go home. They cancel elections. They announce curfews. They declare martial law because, in their view, people are mobilized too much in politics. They want to demobilize people. Totalitarianism is the opposite because it penetrates all aspects of society. So think about when Winston goes to work, there's always a break where they have to do the 2-minute hate. Right? It's just an ordinary part of your day, right? So they're forcing people to be engaged in a certain kind of politics, right? It hypermobilizes society, and it does so by penetrating all aspects of it, not just public, but private spaces as well. It's called totalitarianism because the government tries to have control over everything. Speech, thought, information, language, history, resulting in control of truth and control of people's bodies as well. The warning for Orwell is clear: to be vigilant against this kind of state power. Thanks.